Britain, a land of green pastures, tea drinking, and centuries of political stability. Until now.
This is a disgrace!
Not in my lifetime have we seen anything like this collection of problems.
With his body language has been so contemptuous.
British politics is broken, utterly broken.
The British people are heading to the polls for the fourth time in 5 years to try to break the deadlock over how to leave the European Union.
We've got to the stage where we have no choice. Parliament is paralysed, stuck in a rut.
But this election is unlikely to heal Britain's divided politics. Before the Brexit referendum, Britain had enjoyed decades of relative political stability, with one of the Conservatives or Labour almost always in power. But their success was built on increasingly shaky foundations. One study found that British voters' trust in government suffered a long decline from 1986 until 2012. And two events in particular became emblematic of that loss of trust.
On Tuesday night, I gave the order for British forces to take part in military action and disarm Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction.
The Iraq War has been an enormous turning point because the Iraq War was an example of the government making big policy decisions and big policy promises that turned out to be wrong. We said that we had to have the Iraq War because of weapons of mass destruction. Those weapons of mass destruction have never been found.
And then a few years later,
Are you trading? Are you yes or no?
the elite appeared to be proven wrong again. The financial crisis of 2008 challenged the competence of Britain's ruling class.
The same people told us that we wouldn't have a financial crisis, that boom and bust was finished. They were clever enough to control these financial markets. These experts proved to be wrong.
These two events began to undermine the political centre on which both Labour's Tony Blair and the Conservatives' David Cameron had built their success.
What happened under Tony Blair and David Cameron was the triumph of what I call the Davos elite, which is basically all parties selling the same sort of policies, which are very pro-market, very economically liberal, very socially liberal. And what David Cameron did was to make the Tory party more acceptable to the centre by embracing social liberalism. And what Tony Blair did was to make the Labour Party more acceptable to the centre by embracing economic liberalism. And that was all that was being offered.
The collapse in trust in this elite then gave way to active revolt.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The election of Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party signalled a rejection of the ruling consensus and a decisive shift to the left.
Jeremy Corbyn is an economic radical. I mean, he's presented the most radical manifesto in economic terms that the Labour Party has ever presented, I think.
Then, in 2016, the public had their opportunity to turn on the establishment.
The announcement came just after 7 a.m.
Let June the 23rd go down in our history as our Independence Day.
Within 3 years, Boris Johnson, one of the faces of the Leave campaign, was leader of a Conservative party that had shifted clearly to the right.
And the people of this country voted to get Brexit done.
So Brexit is part of a much broader breakdown of the governing political regime in this country. We have at the moment a Tory party which is moving towards a sort of populist nationalism and a Labour Party which is very left-wing. You have two polarised parties. Now that creates chaos in all sorts of ways.
If Labour were to defy expectations and take power, the party's economic policies alone would have profound consequences.
They have an extremely ambitious, radical set of policies, which is to change entirely the economic model of this country. This country is a very open economy, very dependent on flows of foreign capital, and a lot of that capital will take flight, and a lot of the policies that they want to put through will traumatise big corporations, small corporations. So we will have an extremely traumatic period both on foreign exchanges and domestically.
If neither party ends up with a working majority, They're going to find it harder than ever to form alliances in Parliament now they've vacated the centre ground.
If the Tory party almost wins but doesn't quite win, it won't have anybody to work with because it's so far to the right, according to a Liberal Democrat or a Scottish Nationalist, that they won't work with them. Probably we would have a coalition of the Labour Party plus the Scottish Nationalist Party plus the Liberal Democrats, very broad and rather chaotic coalition.
Such a coalition would legislate for a second Brexit referendum. A solid Conservative victory would spare the country from this fate. But don't expect Boris Johnson's promise to get Brexit done to spell an end to chaos either.
Boris has promised to do this extraordinary thing, which is getting a trade agreement with the European Union by the end of next year. That's really not going to happen. There's too much to do in time. It might lead to a no-deal Brexit, and a no-deal Brexit is extremely disruptive.
And Brexit could mark the start, not the end, of the country's constitutional turmoil.
I think we've never been as close to the breakup of the United Kingdom. Boris Johnson has negotiated a deal with the European Union, which essentially creates a border down the Irish Sea. And that means that Northern Ireland is separate in certain very significant ways from the rest of the United Kingdom and is being dragged slowly into the orbit of the Irish Republic. So that means that the unification of Ireland in the long term is brought nearer.
For Scotland, who voted to stay in the EU, another independence vote is already on the cards.
So the Scots nationalists, whenever they make a speech in Parliament, make a speech about we voted to stay in, but you're taking us out against our will. And so we no longer want to be part of this kingdom.
Scotland has been totally and utterly shafted.
That's boosted support for Scottish independence, because Remainers think that the only way that they can remain in the European Union is to vote for a separate Scotland. More and more, you've got pressure to break up the Union.
Whatever the outcome of the election, there's another reason why neither of Britain's potential prime ministers will end the chaos.
The economy is not growing very fast. The average worker has seen their wages stagnate for at least a decade. How do you get more growth? And how do you make people who felt left out of the system feel more incorporated? And both parties have come up with solutions. The problem is that neither of these solutions is likely to work. The Labour Party solution is too ambitious, it's too anti-market, and the Boris Johnson approach of Brexit plus investing in public services, all economists agree that Brexit will mean a big hit for the economy, and if you're not generating more growth, you can't spend the surplus that you have on public services. So both parties are asking very, very fundamental questions, and both parties are giving the wrong answer to those fundamental questions.
Don't expect their answers to change anytime soon, in part because neither party is likely to return to the political centre anytime soon. Britain could face a future swinging between very right-wing and left-wing governments, and with no end in sight to the political chaos.